Lovely. And David, I'm hoping that you, as well as everybody else, can hear me. So I'm watching the chat is on my right, so I'm watching the chat. There's somebody's trying to get my dog to come in. I might do that in a secchi. So I'm watching the chat. Good, watching the chat here, and I'm definitely going to ask you to interact with me, even though I can't see you, and I it'll be a little bit difficult to unmute you for now, but maybe we can do this at the end. But I've lined this up so that we'll actually interact over the chat, because mindfulness is something that has almost a misnomer. It's so much more about practice than talking and then intellectual heady debates. It's more about actually being here and coming to our five senses. That's the topic that for me really summarizes the how-to or the action that is involved in mindfulness. So I'm going to go through my slides, but as I'm doing this, I'm going to ask you to interact with me and always raise your hand. Carmel's just given me a thumbs up. That's lovely. And talk to me whenever you want me to stop or interrupt or go a little bit differently, because this is supposed to be your Friday evening as well as mine. I'm delighted to be here and chew your ears off about mindfulness. Let me go in straight away, and I fully expect that you're going to interact with me. Okay, I hope we have a deal here. This is what we're going to cover. So I have 5 topics, and I'd like for you to especially think about what's practical about the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. I'll give you a little definition of what mindfulness is based on the latest management science in behavior change theories. And as David was saying, the third wave of behavioral therapies. I'm a very big fan of ACT, which is a very close cousin to the classic mindfulness research. I'll bring you 2 stress antidotes that I've distilled from the science on mindfulness as how I interpret it. One immediate derivation of what mindfulness can mean for stress reduction is it implies that we have to engage in regular mental exercise. We'll do this together. I'll give you a definition of resilience too, because I see a very strong link between mindfulness being the catalyst or the how-to or the thing that triggers resilience in a very nice functional way. Second stress antidote is regular mental breaks. And that sounds super simple and that sounds super easy. But for many of the people that I very much respect and love in my life, dedicated leaders, people who care about those that are in their care, that's quite a difficult instruction to follow, but we'll talk about this as well. And again, I'd like for you to take something practical away. In we go. There's a very big, nice saying in mindfulness, and it was actually coined by Nancy Kleiner, Time to Think, the author of the Time to Think book series. She always said, people don't arrive until they speak. So I've been talking already for a few minutes, but you haven't said anything and you can only chat with me right now. But can I just ask you to do the following for me? Can you check in with yourselves a little bit and write down in the chat function here, what would be a good outcome for you for this session? 1 or 2 words is enough. A short sentence is good. But I'd love for you to put into words what would be a good outcome. What would be a good, brilliant. People are starting to do this already. I might. Yeah. I'm reading these up. Learn something. I'll just read through what I see. Maintain attention to a task. Yeah. Less veering from crisis to another. Increasing knowledge, better understanding about the topic probably. Perhaps also about ourselves. Let's just see if there's anybody else. Yeah. Able to focus, concentrate better. Yeah. Mindfulness is a lot about that. And that's almost the door opener into mindfulness. Got it. Super. So I'm going to keep moving, and I'm wondering if this is also already a little bit of an mindfulness exercise. This checking in with ourselves at the beginning of a session. Janet has just commented as well, more on ACT, keeping focus on mindfulness concepts. Yeah. And so even just this act of writing down what the intention could be for you might help bring you into the here and now. And this might be something practical that you already do. Mindfulness is not about rocket science. It is much more about the standard of behavior that we are showing to the world and checking to what extent is our behavior in line with how we think we should be acting. So if what we're saying here sounds a lot like common sense to you, then my question is, how regularly and routinely do you also apply this common sense? And do I? How routinely am I fully present? Am I aware of what my intention is of the actions that I'm doing? So, without much further ado, let me give you a definition of what mindfulness is. And if you, like myself, have come to the mindfulness science and literature and practice through meditation, then I'd like to say that that is one of many ways to become mindful. As mindful, effectively, as a state, is not the same as meditation and other activities that allow us to become mindful. So the definition that I'm using, based on Ravi Kudesia's work, I'm going to give you the academic reference for this in a second, is, in a nutshell, being open-minded. And that means I am here, and that means my mind is here as much as my body is here. I am open for new information, and I am flexible. That means if you tell me something, or if the situation or the data in front of me tells me something that might need me to shift or to change something, that then is the quality of mindfulness. And so a really good, sorry, I've used the wrong button here. A really good analogy or an image of that is to make a space between the stimulus, what's in front of you, and how you respond. So the act or the action of noticing what is going on for me in the face of what's in front of me is what mindfulness as an action is all about. And perhaps this is most easily explained because of what the purpose of this is. The purpose, if you see this at the bottom of this screen, is we practice mindfulness, or we cultivate our ability to notice or to make space and widen the gap between what's in front of us and how we respond, because it enables us to respond maybe more smartly, more wisely, more, I'm going to use the word strategically, but I mean that not in a cold-hearted business or management sense. I mean this in a sense of, in a way that brings long-term vitality to us and others. So that's what I mean by strategically, wisely, smartly. And that's quite hard. And perhaps this is a nice image to explain this. I was recently in an ACT workshop by Joe Oliver and Rich Bennett, and they told the story of the little dog left outside of the house. I'm not sure you know this story, but imagine that you have a dog at home that looks as cute as this dog here, and you, on a hot summer day, leave the dog outside as you leave the house in the garden. And then As you're outside, it starts to rain, and you suddenly realize that you've left the dog outside in the rain, and you rush back home. You open the back door, and there the dog is in front of you. What will the dog do in that moment? Can anybody chat with me? What will the dog do in that moment? When the dog sees you rushing back, opening the door, run to me, yeah, run towards me, wag his tail. How will the dog feel? The dog will feel happy. Amelia's got it. Yeah, the dog will feel relieved. Now, put yourself in the shoes of that dog. You are somebody who has just been stood up. Somebody else has done something that has harmed you in a way. Maybe they've done it inadvertently. Maybe they have not done it inadvertently. How would you feel, and what would your stance be? What would your attitude be when you see that person opening the door? If we're not talking where you're a dog, right? But how do humans tend to respond in a situation like that? Vanessa's got it. Angry, annoyed, right? Right? So maybe fuming, that's right, and taking it personal. Absolutely, Amelia's got it, right? So we would take it personal. So we basically somehow get entangled with one aspect of the information in front of us. It could be completely appropriate that we are angry, but when we're not mindful, we're effectively inflexible, and we're attached to one version of the truth. We're effectively, and this is how I normally interpret it, we're normally hooked like a fish that then gets pulled into one direction, as opposed to actually looking at the data in front of us and acting on what is here right now. And so, yeah, thank you. People were saying annoyed, sad. Yeah. Even though in the moment, perhaps this is, perhaps it is more strategic to focus on another aspect of the situation. Of course, this is a really, really simple example, but let me ask you to do an exercise that's more related to adults and humans than little dogs being left alone. I keep using my downward arrow. Sorry, forgive me. This is how I need to look. Can I get you to, I don't want you to do this in the chat function, but if you have something to write, can I get you to write this either on a sheet of paper or even actually on a smartphone if you have one handy? And I'm a really big fan of coming to our senses, and that is an action to enable us to be mindful through reflection in writing. And I'll explain a little bit more about this. There's different ways to reflect on how we can become mindful. That means open, fully present to all the data, and a bit of flexibility. That means we have a bit of space and we're not acting on impulse, on an urge, on maybe a short-term goal, such as me when my husband, for example, has done something that I think he shouldn't have done. I tend to act in a short-term, impulse-driven way, and I'm hooked by my need to get revenge or to get justice or dignity, rather than maybe on looking at the full picture. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Yeah, super, cool. Can I get you to write down a moment when you last were hooked by an unhelpful thought? Write down what were the facts in a sentence or two, and then write down how these facts made you feel. Nobody's watching. This is between you and you. I don't want to know anything about what you're writing. But this exercise is about applying the definition of mindfulness, which is about making a bit of space between any stimulus in your life, a situation where you might have got angry, sad, hooked, entangled with one version of reality and how you responded. So in mindfulness, just like in ACT, if you've had a session on ACT before, we're not that much interested in the truth, in whether something is right or wrong. We're more interested in the function of how our mind works. And therefore, we'd like to quite often look at what our mind is doing. What is the story that our mind is telling us? And so I'd like for you to, if you've written, facts, A did this to B, B did this to A. And as you write down how this made you feel, quite often that is already an act of giving you a little bit of space, giving you a little bit of distance between what's there, or maybe what in this case has been there. But the third thing that I'd like for you to think about is what, if you are saying, if we're in the interest of making space, look over what you've written and then see if you can articulate what the best version of you could do next. Do that now. So mindfulness in a nutshell, the action is to make space between what's there and how you respond, so you figuratively come to your senses. And now, can I ask you, can you see this at the bottom? What did you notice? In the comments, please. What do you notice about this process of simply writing down what happened and how it made us feel? And then maybe asking yourself what the version of you that is the smartest, the wisest, the kindest would do next. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Vanessa, if you're saying you're too impulsive, put me in there. I'm too impulsive. Why do you think I study mindfulness? The outcome is different. It's so hard to be objective in the moment. I think that's a really good point. So noticing is the key currency in mindfulness. And of course, it's true that it can put things into perspective, and it might be possible to do something differently. But the game that you're playing when you're applying mindfulness is to notice what your mind is doing and to create a little bit of space between you as the thinker of the thoughts and the thoughts that are constantly going on in your brain. And paradoxically, and I've said this on this slide, if you look over the content of the slide again, it sounds almost anticlimactic, but the act of making a bit of space often is sufficient to actually allow us to shift course towards a more desired, a more vital or valuable outcome. The problem with that, of course, is that if we don't practice this skill, it's very difficult to do it in the moment when we're stressed, especially when we're getting really triggered. And so, right, Vanessa's saying, sit with your thoughts for maybe, yes. And especially sitting with your thoughts with a little bit of distance and a bit of compassion. And so when I say I tend to be impulsive, I like to say that I notice that sometimes I am being impulsive. That is not me, that is what my mind is doing. And so I'm creating a little bit of space between me and my mind. So what we're doing here is, this is a quick explanation of why this works. There's Jamie Pennebaker's research, which is wildly successful, wildly popular and wildly well researched, says expressive writing is effectively a way to lower stress and to increase vitality and well-being, literally by putting thoughts onto paper as opposed to keeping them all in our mind and making a bit of space between us and our thoughts. So if you are not taking anything else away from this session, see if you could practice making a bit of space for yourself whilst reflecting on things where maybe a little bit more time, a little bit more space might have been useful. Let me keep on going. So what is happening and what we're doing typically in mindfulness research and practice is we are noticing, especially when we're stressed. And so I've got these images here in front of me. I'm just looking. Yeah, will the start? Yes, absolutely. We're recording this session, Kelvin. I'm right now explaining really what one of the big goals is in mindfulness. It is about noticing and almost tuning our radar of checking when perhaps we're getting hooked and we're moving away from reality, being here in the real moment, and then recalibrating our thoughts and our actions to be more appropriate to the situation at hand. Now, let's do a bit more practice of this. A more classical way to, and I'm about to do a more classical mindfulness exercise, but all of these classic or reflection-based or contemplation-based or even walking in the woods to come to our senses-based activities are mental exercise. And I'm giving you a bit of an image of a man with very gorgeous biceps in his arms. This stuff, practicing making space between the situation in front of us and our response, is not something that is rocket science, but the bad news about it, it is something that can only develop and become useful with regular practice. And that's why so many people who understand and who teach and who research and who practice mindfulness say practicing mindfulness is a very, very useful part of it. And so if you were to have a more long-term relationship with me and say to me, Jutta, I've tried this exercise, I've tried it even twice, I say, but it is in doing it regularly. It is a bit like physical exercise. And our society and our culture is still today in 2020 a little bit like my Hungarian grandma was when I, in 40 odd years ago, told her that I was doing a lot of physical exercise. It used to be that people thought physical exercise was something that was a chore, that was not something that was part of our daily routine, such as brushing our teeth, for example. Nowadays, we are more and more building up the evidence base that doing mental exercises, such as what I'm going through with you, is a very critical aspect to build the equivalent of physical muscles that get us to be physically strong. So the mental exercise that I would like to walk you through now should be seen as an exercise that you should engage in before you need to have the space between stress and your response. And so my analogy of this is, again, I used to be a rower and I used to want to be a good rower, but for some reason, or because physical exercise was, everybody understood that in order to become a good rower, you had to show up on the river, not just on Saturday morning when the competition was, but you had to show up and get into the boat in November at 6:30 at night when nobody wants to be outside. And you have to show up consistently in order to build the physical muscle mass that would enable you to perform under pressure physically. This is the same with mental exercise. But I'll explain a little bit more. This does work to help us increase the ability to actually catch ourselves before we get hooked. Okay? Before we get hooked. All right. So this exercise is a very simple exercise, and you don't have to do much intellectual stuff about it at all. You don't have to buy expensive books about mindfulness. The power of this is in doing it and learning how to do it regularly. The analogy of it is coming to our five senses. And so this is also a physical instruction. By physically coming to our five senses, we tend to metaphorically also realize what the smartest, the wisest, the most strategic or sustainable way of responding to the situation is. I will talk you through, and I will ask you literally, and look at this diagram, to do nothing but focus on the three of the five senses that I will ask you to concentrate on. So it'll take us 2 minutes or so to do this exercise. I will ask you to focus on your sense of feeling, first of all, and proactively, deliberately focus your attention on your sense of feeling. And then I will ask you to switch your attention deliberately onto your sense of hearing and notice what you can hear. And then finally, I will ask you to do nothing but focus on your sense of seeing. If you're ready and you're willing to practice with me, here we go. I'd like for you to start by settling into your chair, or if you're sitting, or maybe even if you're standing, to kind of do whatever you need to do to come home to yourself. Maybe sit up a little bit more upright. Maybe stand a little bit more tall and pull your shoulders away from your ears. Make sure both of your feet are flat on the ground. I'm going to lower my gaze, and I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. You don't have to do that, but it tends to be a bit easier if you lower your gaze down. And for the first few moments, see if you can notice yourself, the weight of your body sitting here. And so the first of the 3 steps involved in coming to our senses is to do nothing but notice the sensations in your body. What's it like to have nothing else to do but perhaps notice that there might be some tingling somewhere in your body? For the next few moments, all you need to do is focus all your attention on sensing inwards, noticing perhaps your belly expanding as you breathe in, and noticing your belly contracting as you breathe out. No need to analyze. No need to interpret these instructions. Whatever you can do to concentrate on noticing what sensations are there in your body. That's the only focus of this first step in this exercise. Whenever your mind starts doing something else and you notice it, no need to do anything but simply resetting your resolve to focusing your attention. Sorry, that is my dog. And perhaps this is my cue to ask you to focus and shift your attention on what you can hear. So let go of focusing on sensing into your body and willfully, deliberately focus your attention on the sounds and the noises around you now. Do that now. Perhaps noticing something nearby and then something further away. Perhaps noticing your reaction as I'm giving you this instruction. Perhaps refocusing on sitting here, on paying attention to being here. And finally, let me ask you to shift your attention on a third of your five senses, your sense of seeing. If you had your eyes closed, can I get you to look up and look around and see if you can notice three things you hadn't seen before? Perhaps a color, a shape, or a pattern, whilst I close my door for my dog. Forgive me, I'm going to be back in 1 second. My apologies, everybody. I was trying to get you to gently wake up from this exercise, and my dog thwarted my attempts to do this. But perhaps it's possible for you to come out of this exercise, this mental exercise practice, and see if you can check in with yourself and see if you can notice how you feel right now. And let me know in the chat function. If you're feeling angry at my dog because she interrupted the practice, I will take that. That is what's real. Thank you. Sorry about that. My mind is telling me what an awful mindfulness instructor I am right now. But thank you very much. Thank you very much. There is something about being grounded, right? And so what is it that you noticed? What could you notice when you were focusing on sensing rather than thinking, rather than intellectualizing? Vanessa's dog was there as well. Yeah, right. It is so difficult to shift into this sensing mode. And still, this is the practice that is really important. Yeah. Janet is saying something really important here. It gives you space away from your thought. So the metaphor is, I think, a really helpful metaphor that you, as this organism, by shifting your mode into sensing, you create a bit of space from this brains on sticks idea that we tend to have. We think that our mind, our thoughts are everything that is there, but that's not true. Thank you. Let me link this to your resilience. Right. And so, but guys, also, I'm not moving on yet, because your comments are the evidence that I need you to collect. So if you scroll back up, even as I'm continuing to talk, and even though this was not a perfect practice in my book, for example, it was an exercise, and I'm going to go back to asking you to think about if you can do this. I struggle with relaxation as well. That's why I researched this topic. So if I were to ask you to come to your senses once a day, you would probably know what I mean. The instruction is literally to zoom in and funnel all your attention onto one specific sense in your body. It could be the sense of hearing. It could be the sense of seeing. It could be the sense of feeling. Alison is asking, is there a better time of day to do this? There's no scientific evidence that says it's better in the morning or in the evening. It depends on what your either what your day is, what your ability is, what your motivation is. But there is a linear relationship between practicing, and I'm going to go back to this slide. There's a linear relationship between deliberately doing this exercise and having the mental equivalence of the muscle memory to actually shift out of overthinking, perhaps overanalyzing, perhaps getting hooked um, about a specific feeling, especially a negative one. And so that's why the exercise is a useful way to practice building up that potential. Okay, I'm going to move on and go into resilience. We still are doing well on time, and I'd like to now shift our attention from what mindfulness is and what the how-to or the practice of mindfulness is. One of the key practices is to make a bit of space between what I think is going on and my response. And we were practicing this by either doing a bit of reflective writing to become aware of even what our thoughts and feelings are, and by shifting our attention to sensing in the here and now, and to resilience. And so the reason why I've done this is because if you look at the definition of resilience, resilience is consists of two parts: stress, which is not necessarily bad, as you all know. Stress tends to be useful, motivating, energizing, plus recovery. And if you look at this image of the brain here, when somebody is resilient, their brain is effectively in balance between being challenged and pushed to the border of their comfort zone and recovering from that challenge. And so you've got the definition of resilience here as the capacity to adapt successfully in the face of adversity. But this is what happens to the real world, to us in the real world. Our brains are 200,000 years old, and they are hardwired to look out for threats and challenges. And we have 5 times as many negative thoughts as positive thoughts. So nowadays, our threats and challenges are very little physical, very rarely physical in nature. They are very often intellectual in nature. I work a lot with the armed forces, and so I work a lot with people who are in these meetings in operations rooms where they're debating a lot of intellectual data. But look at what sometimes happens when we are throwing intellectual data back and forth in meeting rooms. What happens to our brains is we tend to get hooked on what somebody said, or maybe how they said something, or maybe how they didn't say something when we said something. And so in our mind, it becomes a big drama story. And now, one of the most useful ways to unhook from this inner drama, from our mind telling us a story that may or may not be helpful, is to remember that we have to be in balance between being in these two modes here. So this is a model of, it's a simplification, but it is empirically supported not only by neuroscience, which is mostly neurobiology, but also brain functional and structural research of brain functions. If you look at the diagram that I've got here, what most of us have been rewarded for and what we are prizing ourselves in being good at is what Mark Williams called the doing mode. So the doing mode, which is also thinking about doing, it's about problem solving, goal attainment, analyzing, mental time travel. That means me imagining myself in the future, me imagining myself in the past. And as Dan Kahneman, one of the world's most foremost decision-making scholars, said, this is what we do when we're anticipating remembering. This is what my children do when I put a nice meal in front of them. They basically take a photo of the meal and send it on to wherever they're sending this onto now, rather than enjoying the meal and actually smelling and tasting the food. And so Kahneman is saying one of the biggest problems in decision making is that when we're in the moment, we are actually partially already anticipating remembering. So if I'm not careful, in this moment right now, I am giving you this webinar presentation, but my mind could be my best friend, but my mind could also be my biggest enemy by telling me, Jutta, how are you doing here? Are you going to be proud of your performance in this webinar, or are you going to be disappointed in yourself? So my brain could take me away from paying attention to what you are, how you're responding, and how you're reacting to me. Now, what's the other big mode of being that is going on in the brain? And it is what Mark William coined the being mode. This is the mode of being where we don't have an immediate goal in front of us, where we're not really focused on getting somewhere different, but where we're specifically focused on what, how, who is in the present. And this is when other people look at us, when they see that we are actually present, when we are embodied, when we're authentic. And this is also the mode that everybody smells it or gets it when we're actually present, connected with other people. Kahneman calls this experiencing, and it's actually really unfortunate that in his book in 2011 he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a culmination of all of his decision-making research that won him the Nobel Prize. But the book is terribly written, and so in a book reading he sheepishly admitted that most people, out of the 2 million people that bought his book, only read the first 10 or 20 pages of the book, and only at the very end does, after beating everybody about, the bush about how bad we are at decision making, he gives people one instruction about how to make better decisions. And it is to do more experiencing, be present through our 5 senses in the moment, rather than mentally doing multitasking, multi-track thinking. And Kahneman calls this anticipating remembering. Now, I'm just about to get to I would like for you to apply this. I'm just going to briefly talk you through what happens to our brains when we are shifting to be a bit more in balance and a bit out of the go, 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 do mode, and more in deliberately focusing on being in being mode, in coming to our 5 senses mode. And I think all of you, even though I'm not going to talk about this study just yet, I think all of you will understand this if I tell you that whenever we are struggling with a big problem at work, in our family, and when we are removing ourselves from the meeting room, or nowadays the Zoom meeting room, maybe taking a break, maybe going on a holiday, and on day 2 or day 3 of the holiday, the solution comes to us for something that we've been bashing our heads against the wall in meetings with people beforehand. It is because when we're in the being mode, the centers of the brain that are activated are the centers for long-term memory formation and long-term memory retrieval. The centers of identity formation. That means we are linking what we're doing to who and why we are here. And the centers of pattern recognition. And broadly speaking, in the doing mode, those brain centers are not as activated as when we're in being mode. And that is because we were designed to digest activity by sitting with it and allowing it to settle. And that's why it's a strategic activity for you. You know where I'm going, that you should dwell more in balance between doing and being. So, and Alison saying, how do we actually be present in the moment rather than mentally multitasking? Would it be from practicing mindfulness and coming to your senses? Bingo. So the first stress antidote that I've covered already is to practice shifting our attention through a 5 senses mode. That's a mental push-up, effectively. And so the more often, when you're brushing your teeth or when you're cooking, you actually smell the smells of the food, you are flicking the switch from being in a doing and activating of, problem solving mode to a simply experiencing mode. And there is a practice element to it that is linear. That means the more you practice shifting mode, the more you are able to get into that spaciousness deliberately. And this brain study shows it. So there's it's actually replicated several times now. In the US Marines have practiced over several weeks techniques that effectively are the same as us saying coming to our senses. And what happens is their brain functionally and structurally changes, and they've been going through brain scans, and my own research has replicated this, and hundreds of other scholars' research has actually replicated the brain changes through self-report or objective performance tests that go on when people exercise their brains by not focusing on solving problems, but on focusing on experiencing the here and now. And so let me very briefly talk you through the red kind of bar that you see there is the activation of they call it the right insula. The right insula is the center in the brain that gets activated when we're stressed and when we mobilize to go to fight or flight. And so if you look at this study, before the training, 2 groups were going through the mental exercise program, and at the beginning of the training, the base condition of the group that were going to go through the mental training, the mindfulness training, was actually to have a more activated right insula. That means they were more prone to feeling stressed and to going into fight or flight mode. After the training, the reverse of these brain functions and structural measurable brain compositions was the case. That means that they were much less likely to get triggered to feel stress and to respond in a stressful way than before, and then even the control group. And this is the same that you will see for elite sports people when they are in an extremely stressful situation. So if you think about elite tennis players, when they're really performing well, seem to have more time in taking their stroke than normal people who get stressed by all that sensory input that comes their way. And it's because elite sports people have practiced processing sensory information very deliberately and very consciously. And that has a dampening down effect on the mobilizing, on the fight or flight response in the brain. And it is effectively an analogy, but it's also true for us. If we were as cool as a cucumber when we are mentally stressed as an elite sports person is when they're under physical challenge, then our performance and our ability to respond smartly based on the data in the situation, rather than on us being hooked by a thought that might or might not be very helpful. That is what's going on. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Okay, what does this mean for you? So now, I would like for you to give me answers, not even to me actually. I'd like for you, we're now going into the second part of this. So I'd like for you to literally just use a biro and give yourself a tick for each of the 5 questions that I'm going to ask you now, if you can say yes as an answer to those questions. Right. So, and I'm literally asking you, where are you in terms of balance between doing and being, And I've asked you these, I've created these questions to kind of say, what does this mean concretely for people? Firstly, okay, do you regularly disconnect from electronics in the evenings so you're genuinely offline? Give yourself a tick if you say yes. You don't need to do this in the chat. Do this for yourself. I'm going to ask you to comment on it in a second. Second, can you honestly say that you regularly notice that you're fully present when you're with your loved ones? And this is, for example, if you have small children, that you fully notice that they are with you. If you have teenagers, they're the ones that you have to nudge. Sometimes small children nudge us that we're not fully present. Teenagers, in my case, I have to nudge them. Number 3, do you daily engage in interests that noticeably re-energize you? And those are not professional podcasts that you to listen to. They are not yoga exercises or mindfulness exercises when you hate the guts of the yoga or the mindfulness instructors. Those are things that you do for yourself, to be, to recover, to be in balance. Do you still do this? Do you connect in a meaningful way with people around you that you care on a daily basis? Social connection is such a good way of getting back into balance. And finally, do you get enough sleep? Okay, so those are the 5 questions that I've got. I'm now going to ask you to, let me just put my light on, because I think it's getting a little bit dark here. So this leads me to my second instruction for you. So the second instruction that I have for you to make mindfulness real for yourself and for the people that you might teach or train in mindfulness as you maybe spread the word about this. The first antidote to stress is to do mental exercise, such as shifting your attention mode from thinking to an experience through 5 senses mode. The second bit is to literally make a commitment to take a break from thinking, doing, planning and analyzing, because our brains are designed to be in balance. And so look at this image here. And so if this image is the image of a woman, this is a stewardess, of course, who puts on an oxygen mask because she's telling us that in an emergency, we need to put on our own oxygen mask first before we look after other people's oxygen needs. And I find this very difficult because I have 3 children that I love very much. And I have one child at least that never follows any instructions. So this instruction for me is very difficult, because if there were an emergency and I would have to trust that I have enough time to look after myself before looking after my girl, I find this difficult. But of course it makes perfect sense to put on my oxygen mask first. Because if I don't have enough balance in my life, if I don't have enough ability to have replenished, remember we're talking about resilience, my recovery element of what resilience is, stress plus recovery, I cannot perform and I cannot actually even dream of having a measured response to a stressful situation. So can I get you to think about what values would come up for you if you look at this image that would motivate you to be committed to being more in balance between being and doing? Because you know that I've got an exercise up my sleeve for you, an instruction effectively up for you. In the chat function, what would be valuable about being in balance between being and doing, that relates a little bit to putting on your own oxygen mask first, that you might find motivating to take regular mental breaks? Yeah. Self-care. Yeah. Not panicking. Self-care so you can help others, right? Because the people that I typically meet, I respect very much and I care about very much, tend to be people who take care of others, who look after others. And so when I say to them that translating the science of mindfulness into 2 main instructions, one is to do mental exercise, But 2 is to regularly take breaks from performing, take mental breaks to breathe. They will say, yes, but I don't have time to breathe. Yeah, physical health as well as mental health. Somebody's saying taking breaks and making it a priority no matter how much I have to do. Janet is also saying it very nicely, self-replenishment. So the word values, or the this word of motivators or drivers is really important here, because with mindfulness, if we are present in the here and now, the next step is to actually know why we might want to do something that is wise or that is in the long-term interest for us and others. And that's where reminding ourselves of what's important to us, what is useful to us and others comes in. And so this is why I've put this oxygen mask in here, to ask you to just think about what would motivate you as a driver to actually believe the good science that says people manage stress well who are regularly making time for themselves, who are regularly making time for replenishment. And so I'm going to just put those 5 questions that I've just had here up to you one more time. So look at those 5 questions once more. I've asked you to give yourself ticks. Some of you might have 5 ticks in the box, which is brilliant. That would indicate that you are more in balance between doing and being. But some of you might have only given yourself 2 or 3, or maybe only just 1 tick. And that would suggest that you're maybe more in the doing mode than in the balance between doing and being mode. Whenever I do this with real, live audience, I get a sense that most people in the room tend to be very good at dwelling in the brain mode of doing, thinking, and tend to be less familiar with the brain mode of being. And that is the second mental exercise that I'd like for you to engage with. Can I get you now to think about what you noticed? And you remember I said the key word in mindfulness is noticing. And so looking over these questions again is in itself a mindfulness exercise that I would like to know about what comes up for you as you reflect on the answers you've given and how that relates to managing stress more strategically, more mindfully, by being more in balance between doing and being. Somebody says they had all crosses rather than ticks. Yep. You know what? In mindfulness, you cannot lose. And I'm not being a Pollyanna. I'm not saying we are replacing, radio doom and gloom, or we're replacing negative thinking with positive thinking. But by noticing that something is real, we are already creating a bit of space. So noticing gives us choice. Noticing gives us an option to go, okay. So even if you notice something negative, perhaps that's more valuable than noticing something positive, because if something positive is the case, then you might not need to change anything. I'm not looking after myself properly. You're not the only one, right? I had 1 tick, me too, and all those things take time. Yeah. Many of us are on a stimulus reaction mode. So now the most important question I'd like for you to think about, and you don't have to put this in the comment because we're up to the hour as well. What action could result from you reflecting on me saying that if you believe the underlying science to what I've presented here, the underlying science says that those people that strategically plan into their days and weeks times for connection with people around them that they love, times for recovery for themselves, times for enjoyment, heaven forbid. And what action could you move towards? Write this down for yourself. Yeah, I find it also difficult to just be, but there's an enormous amount of evidence now that says the more that I practice being, the more I am able to dwell in that mode. Does that make sense? Is it possible to believe that physical muscle development is similar as mental agility and mental muscle development? If you believe that, then perhaps you might make a resolution to move a little bit more towards feeling more comfortable to just be. Yeah. So this is what I've covered. So what I've done, very simply, I've said mindfulness is open-mindedness, but that's really nice to say. Like, it's really easy to say. Mindfulness means we're fully present, we are open to the information in front of us, and we're flexible in our attitude. Nice words. Much more important than the definition is, how do you become mindful? And the action of how to become mindful is to make space between the situation in front of us and noticing what's happening. And that is really difficult to do in the moment when we're stressed. But the science is very strong that says, if we practice stress antidote number 1, that means regularly shift our almost information processing mode from thinking and being fused or hooked with our thoughts to grounding ourselves in our 5 senses, we have more of a chance to make space and notice. And it takes, in some situation and for some people, it takes longer, but it is linear. That means the more we practice mentally exercising. I'm going to come to your question, Alison, in a second. And the more we do it, the better it is. In a study that I've run, I've measured the objective performance, and I've measured self-reported resilience or stress response for people after 6 weeks of mindfulness training once a week with as much daily practice as people are willing to do. Normally, I train these alpha male individuals who tend to not do a lot of homework practice in this area, but even just in my study of 6 weeks, people performed more calmly in a stressful performance situation. And there are now replicated brain studies that say even 4 times 15 minutes of coming to our senses creates a measurable change in the brain architecture to down-regulate fight and flight center activating and to up-regulate memory, identity, and pattern recognition centers in the brain. But of course, it is like physical muscle training. That means if that training isn't kept up, it's like muscle atrophy. So the bad news about mindfulness practice is that we have to continuously exercise the muscle in order to benefit from its results. It is not true to say that I have gone on a weekend mindfulness course and I've swallowed a pill of mindfulness, and that means I am good to go for the rest of my life. But it is as simple as physical muscle training. It is as linear. It's almost a bodily function. And I will... it's difficult. How long is a piece of string, right? Alison, does that make sense? I'm now looking at your question still. Yeah, cool. And so, but the other way that you can get into this is to strategically plan to put your oxygen mask on and to be motivated by the long-term benefits of regularly committing to self-care. Right. And so that's what I've covered. And I'd like for you to now share what's a takeaway? What's something that is useful, interesting, maybe difficult? In this, the nutshell here is the more we make space, the more often we practice noticing, the more choice we have in life. Need to keep practicing. It's probably this. It's inconvenient, but it's not a terrible message, is it, Carmel? This is literally something like brushing teeth. If we keep on brushing teeth, there's something that becomes intrinsically rewarding about brushing teeth, and it becomes a habit that is rewarding through the practice of of doing it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's one thing that you could commit to doing, or you could recommit to doing? Some Brenda's saying 15 minutes, and I'm saying if you can do 15 minutes, great. If you can do 2 or 5, it's also better than nothing. It is literally linear. And the less ambitious our goals are to be in balance and to look after our self-oxygen mask, the more our body then almost, continues to claim for it. Cool. Thank you. Good stuff. I'm going to say thank you. Don't buy a book on mindfulness. There's tons of free material out there. Send me an email if you want to have more material that's free. Many people who buy mindfulness books tend to have them gather dust on their bedside table. It is not the skills and the intellectual stuff is the less important bits than actually practicing it.